Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and I am the host of the Muddy Waters podcast. And the Muddy Waters podcast exists to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on here in Maine. Especially with how muddy and difficult it is to really understand what's going on. Largely due to the fact that the mainstream media is not doing a good job, not doing its job. Reporting on what's actually happening. When they do report on it, they seem to be reporting on it from the perspective of the propaganda arm of the left. And so we try to combat that and try to win, this information war that we have by bringing on different people from around the state that know what's happening on the ground, whether that's parents and school board members, city council, or legislators, or just business owners, people who have been impacted and see what's going on, people who work in healthcare, like what's actually really happening in our state. And so that's kind of our goal. That's what we're trying to do here. And if you want to support the podcast, there's ways to do it. You can buy our merch. As you can see today, I'm wearing a new hat with our cool logo. There's a little QR code if you ever want to take a look at that, just to support the podcast so that we can continue to bring you this content. So today we have with us a special guest, Aaron Chadbourne. Aaron Chadbourne is a former senior policy advisor under Paul LePage. So all those many years back now, it feels like so long ago that we had a conservative governor who actually tried to put in place policies that were good for our state, and we've been replaced with good old Janet Mills. Thanks for coming on, Aaron.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, former senior policy advisor to LePage, it's an honor. Yeah, and it really is. I say that jokingly, but it is an honor to have you on because you've got some great knowledge and insight. And also on top of, being that, you also are, a weekend host of, is it Inside Maine, right? That's what that's
Inside
called.
Maine on WGAN. And then I fill in weekdays. I'll fill in for Matt Gagnon on the WGAN Morning News. And I also fill in sometimes for Howie Carr, obviously a radio icon in New England, on the Howie Carr Show. And today I was hosting the Grace Curley Show for Grace. So I like to dabble in talk radio because it's a way to really, I like to talk about talk radio, and much in the same way that podcasts and the new media space now does, is it was really one of those ways to connect people, the silent majority in America, where you're exposed so much to the mainstream media, which is trying to convince you that you're crazy and that no one agrees with you and that your positions are extreme. And really, there's this community of people, and talk radio has always connected them on the right because it's a medium that goes directly into, for me, I grew up listening to the radio in my dad's truck, right? As you're driving along, you're able to hear it. The callers on the show, I think, are so powerful. It allows people to connect and to build that sense of community. And so it's been something I've always been passionate about, something I grew up listening to. And of course, when I worked for Governor LePage, it was a way to sometimes get your message out. We also, for Governor LePage, would often use Facebook and other forums to have video that went direct to the marketplace because we knew that media filter was so distorting, and they only covered a very narrow lens of him as a person, his policies. It was always filtered through their agenda or through the narrative that they already wanted to believe anyway. And so I will say it was a big honor to work for Governor LePage. He was a wonderful boss. He was a visionary leader. He sometimes got himself in a little trouble. There were some self-inflicted news cycles that would happen, but it's because of his passion for the state of Maine and for doing a lot of the things for Maine that Donald Trump's trying to do for the U.S. right now. There are a lot of parallels there. There are some differences. There are some policy differences. There are approach differences, management differences, as you'd expect from two different business leaders. But there are a lot of similarities in terms of the passion and the motivation. What LePage tried to do for Maine, you see Trump trying to do for the U.S. in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think LePage, when he was getting ready to run again in 2022, I remember I was at a Lincoln dinner and he commented, and I'm sure he said this many times, that he was Trump before Trump in a lot of ways, in the sense that he said things that got himself in trouble, but ultimately...
Yeah, I don't know if you were in Maine at the time when he ran for re-election, but there was that great ad that Barbara Bush cut for him where she basically said, she sometimes is known for being outspoken, and certainly so is Paul. And he was, I think, there are a lot of parallels in the way the media covered LePage to how the media covers Trump. There are a lot of parallels in, they both come from the business world, and they both come from the privately owned businesses. I think there's a big difference for politicians, whether it be governor, senator, or legislator, that come from if you're running for governor, you've been in the legislature. If you're running for president, you've been in the Senate. You have a different view of how you talk to the public, who you represent, than if you come from the business world. In the business world, there are publicly traded companies, but Trump was privately owned business. LePage worked in privately owned business, and LePage, his skill set came from the turnaround world, where he would go into kind of troubled companies and help turn them around. And when you do that, you start from the bottom up. You look at every single detail and you look for the biggest impact areas where you can make improvements. And so he had a pretty keen eye for details, and he was everywhere all the time, all at once, trying to like pull different levers at the time, which is much what you're seeing from the second version of the Trump administration, where I think they have a little bit more experience than they did the first go around. And they also have a sense of urgency. So you're seeing a lot happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. I haven't been so focused on what's going on with Trump, but you mentioned all these things about LePage, and I'm like being brought back to the LePage days. Though I wasn't as aware of what's going on, but like the way in which they would take his words and twist them. I actually remember he got frustrated at some point and did I think it was a Facebook Live, basically commenting on how they take these like 15-second clips of what he's saying and twist it and use it against him. And
one of the first times I went to an event with him, Chuck, that's so burned into my memory is he was doing a town hall, which he believed that it was his responsibility to do town halls. We tried to talk him out of it because that's where a lot of the negative stuff would happen. Not because he did anything wrong, but because the media would use it against him, or they'd have, the woman in Saco that threw the jar of Vaseline at him, or Joanne Toomey, or, you'd have all these like things that would happen. Probably we're like, why do you need to do this? You could just be governor. He's like, no, it's my responsibility to go out to the Maine people, to tell them what I think and to get their feedback. And he fundamentally believed that. So the first time I went to a town hall with him, he was speaking at, I think it was a church in Lisbon. And I had traveled down, was attending a town hall. I was working on tax reform, which was his big platform in his second administration. And he was speaking. You saw the reporters all in the front row. They were taking notes. And then the second he raised his arm above his waist to like look angry, you heard the clicks of the cameras nonstop. Click, 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 click. They only took pictures that were unflattering, that made him look angry. That, of course, was before he had his dramatic weight loss. And so he was a little bit heavier then. After he lost all the weight, they still used the fatter pictures of him just to be less flattering. Like he had to look angry. It had to fill this narrative that he was this angry troll who lived under the bridge that was going to eat your children, rather than he was a patriotic American, someone who was focused on the future of the state of Maine, on his children's future, on his grandchildren's future, and on preserving the way of life for future generations. And someone who had a great history in Maine business to know how to do it. So, and you saw that that's a lens. He used to joke that if he said, I'm going to walk across the street, the headline would read, LePage threatens to, that's right. Just how they write. And it's unfortunate. So one thing that people would say all the time when they meet him in person, they'd see how funny and generous and upbeat and just really how infectious his personality was. They'd say, why don't you guys ever show that? Like, why doesn't he ever do that? And you're like, that's how he is all the time. It's just the media only has a very narrow narrative that they let out there. And so a lot of things are covered that way. And I think you see the same thing when you look at, some of the Trump hoaxes, like the Find People on Both Sides hoax. You see that there are these ways that if you repeat a lie enough, people believe that it's true. And that's certainly what Joe Biden believed, and it's how he approached Trump. And I think it was very effective, and it's very effective at keeping people from it. That's why I think Donald Trump's ability to go on the Joe Rogan podcast for 3 hours, something Kamala Harris wouldn't agree to do. She would go for an hour at max. She wanted a different location. There were all these negotiations. There was one of the unions, I forget which one it is now, maybe the AFL-CIO. They have a presidential forum. So for every presidential candidate they invite to speak to them, they ask them the same 20 questions. And you know what the 20 questions are because they've asked every presidential candidate those questions from both parties, from primary, from whatever. Kamala Harris's people would only agree to go and take 3 questions. And they said, well, that's the forum. The forum is 20 questions. So you're coming to the 20 question forum. We're going to ask you 20 questions. And when they asked the 4th question, I think her people made her get up and leave. You had Trump, who was willing to go on these long form interviews with any of the new podcast leaders, and he was able to talk directly to people, and he said all the things he wanted to do. And he's Trump, right? So he says it's the weave. It may be the weave. It may just be kind of stream of consciousness for him. But he's pretty consistent. You get a good sense of how wedded he is to certain ideas, how open he is to other things, and it just gave people a sense for who he was as a person. I think that made a big difference in the election.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are so many factors that we could look at, I think, that helped Trump win in 2024, but that definitely is one of them. I mean, I think his being on the Joe Rogan podcast, even though for people who were paying attention, he didn't say anything different than he said at any of his rallies or he'd said anywhere. So you didn't really learn any new information, but it was just
But there are a lot of people that weren't watching his rallies who are watching Joe Rogan, because there are a lot of people that aren't as dialed into politics. You obviously are. That's why you have the Muddy Waters podcast. You follow this stuff. You're active in politics. But there are a lot of people that aren't, that really don't think about politics. And so for them, they kind of think about things that affect their everyday lives, and they'll go to other spaces. And so Trump basically came to places where people already were, and they had never heard it before because it wasn't getting to them through the media they consume.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's part of the reason, again, we go back to like why we're trying to do this and trying to create content that can go into spaces where, we really are losing the information war, which is, in Maine in particular, places like TikTok and Instagram, where, we're really largely behind. And a lot of people consume their information there. When I was running for office in 2022, I initially was like, I'm not doing any social media because I wanted to prove that, the old school methods of winning an election, go door to door, that's all we need to do. And it became apparent to me that like young people, even if they're home, they don't come to the door. And a lot of times they're not home because like younger people, generally speaking, are more busy, and they're especially my generation and younger, we're just more likely to be out doing things when we do have free time than be sitting at home when we have free time. And so if you want to reach those people, you have to go where they are. And so we have to go into social media, and that's, that's kind of, and Trump got that too. And, not just was he on the podcast, but also doing stuff on TikTok, bragged about how he had so many followers after he started his TikTok account. I think, yeah, that definitely is a huge part of I think one of the factors that led to his victory in 2020. The question I have, so did you, I mean, I'm sure you're obviously aware of all the protests that happen around the state. What are your thoughts do you have thoughts on that, I guess, or about, again, I think one of the things I commented on to some friends is like, okay, so when Republicans, we were really excited. We had this like grassroots, and it really was grassroots, rally on, I think it was March 1st at the Capitol. And we probably had around, I would say at least, I'm thinking 700-800 to as many as 1,000 people were at that first rally. It was very organic. It wasn't very well defined. There were a bunch of random people with different agendas that kind of all coalesced together, whether it was Maine Girl Dads wasn't there, but it was mentioned. There were a number of different reasons why people showed up that day. But we probably were excited to see that we had like maybe 1,000 people there. And the Democrats on Saturday had people all across the state, probably in excess of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 when you encapsulate all the different areas where they were protesting. And I think some people could be discouraged by how many people got out for their protest versus ours. And I just don't know if you have any thoughts about whether or not we should even care.
So what's interesting to me is the reaction to Donald Trump 2.0 versus Donald Trump 1.0, because they started these tactics sooner during the first Trump administration. They started talking about impeachment the day that Donald Trump announced his candidacy when he came down the escalator. I remember I was in DC for Trump's inauguration the first time, and you had the protesters there with the pink hats and the whole thing. And they didn't quite go at it the same way this time. And I think the diehards are disappointed by that. So it's been very interesting to kind of watch how they figured out what they were doing. Now, I was in Portland on Saturday morning, and I saw a lot of, I would call them senior citizens. So people over 60 with posters getting ready to walk to the Portland protest. And I know there are many different places, but really like the thing I keep coming back to is like, what were they doing and why? Because to protest in Portland, Maine about Donald Trump, like that, who is that impacting? Is it impacting Susan Collins and how she votes? It's not impacting Shelley Pingree. She's going to do whatever she wants. It's not, you're not talking to Donald Trump. It's really, I think, for them, a way to feel like they're doing something. So I think it's somewhat performative. It's somewhat cathartic for them. I was over the weekend, I listened to Jen Psaki's show. I always listen to what her monologue is because she sometimes says the quiet part out loud because she's so close to all of those operatives. And so you can see kind of what their agenda is. And she described last week as the best political week for Democrats since Trump was elected. And the things that she cited were Cory Booker's speech, which broke the record for the longest Senate speech ever, which I really didn't understand the Cory Booker speech thing because like he wasn't filibustering anything. Like he gave a filibuster, but he just held the floor, but for no reason other than to perform, right? It was to perform and to set a record, kind of like someone would try to attempt a Guinness Book of World Record like thing, right? Like to have them like, you know, the most, you know, carrots eaten while on your head. Like that's what Cory Booker did. But that for them, like I think the bar is so low for how Democrats have been performing in office that was remarkable. And so that's interesting. And then the next thing about why it was a great week for them was because the Wisconsin Supreme Court maintained its current composition and didn't change. So they're saying like it was a big devastating blow to Elon Musk because he poured all this money in. Okay, cool. Yep, he lost. He was on the losing side of it, but it was a status quo election in Wisconsin. They said because the Republicans won in blowouts in both the special elections in Florida, but the blowouts were less than how much Trump won those districts by, which, of course, like local reps underperform Trump all the time. So not a real surprise there that non-incumbents in a special election where Republicans tend to underperform in special elections, they won by less than what they could have. So like all this stuff, they're kind of like tilting at windmills a little bit to try to find victories for Democrats so they can change the narrative, because it's all about the narrative. It's all about what they can make you believe. And they've had a problem since Trump got elected in no one believes in them anymore. So they have to create something to believe in. And so what they're doing right now is they're trying to do a vibe shift, much like the shift they did when Joe Biden stepped down and Kamala became the candidate. And we were told that it was the summer of joy and that this was a generational swing. She raised more money than anyone else. She had this $1 billion in a week, and she was going to reset generationally politics, and all these young people were going to vote. And it's wishful thinking. And these are things that are kind of low barrier things to do that help emphasize that narrative. And the left is better at organizing because they have a few different weapons to do it. First of all, they have the unions, and the unions have a way to distribute information to their members. Even the federal workforce, right? The federal workforce, without telling their people, oh, go do this, they can distribute the information to all workers to say, there will be protests on these days. We wanted you to make you aware of it for situational awareness, in case you see it happening, in case it affects your department, in case for public safety. But really, they're telling you, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you should go to this protest. Right. The unions have always, I mean, whenever we ban dark money or ban corporate money, they always do a carve out for the unions so that the left has it. They're better at organizing. They've done organizing for a long time. They have professional organizers. Remember Barack Obama before he ran for president? That was his profession, was he was a community organizer. They have that apparatus where Republicans, when Republicans lose elections, they go back to work. And I don't mean just go back to their job they were doing before. They go back to the private sector. They go back and they take on jobs. They go back to making money. They go back to providing for their family. They don't stay in the permanent ecosystem of the government. When Democrat politicians, like look at Stacey Abrams. What's Stacey Abrams' job since she lost? When Democrats, even in the Maine legislature, when they term out or when they lose, they go and work for a nonprofit. They go and work for someone that gets government funding. They go and work for a political organization. I can name like dozens of Democrats I know that have done that. I can name like a handful of Republicans I know that have done that. So it's really interesting that they have this organizing advantage. And they also, in Maine, so you see a high number of anti-Trump people show up. Trump lost Maine, right? Like Maine went for Harris. So in a place
about
where
7%.
Of course, you're going to find people willing to protest him. Yeah, not very surprising. You'll find more of them in the places where Kamala did well. on the show I mentioned on MSNBC, they used Farmington, Maine as an example of like, oh, even places like Farmington, Maine that have voted for Trump every time, like they had a big protest there. Well, Farmington, Maine is a college town.
Yeah, did they
It's
actually
also
vote
the
for Trump?
hometown of Governor Janet Mills. I don't think it's a far-fetched idea to think you're going to have a big turnout for an anti-Trump protest in Janet Mills' hometown.
Well, Janet Mills' hometown, and as you said, I spent like 14 years of my life living in Farmington. The college students are very, obviously, we know college students today in general, but they've always been super motivated there and would turn up for anything, especially if it's anti-Republican in any way. So it's no surprise to me that they had a bunch of, probably it was mostly like old cat ladies and college students who got together to protest. But that's not a surprise at all. Yeah.
I mean, so it is what it is. So I think anyone who's trying to take anything from this now, I think if you want to look back to the success of political movements, there was the Occupy Wall Street movement that the left had back in, when was it? After the economic downturn.
Yeah.
So
like
probably
2010 or something like that.
So there's the Occupy Wall Street movement, and they were very visible and they were everywhere. But then they never found a way to convert their energy into action and actually change anything. After that, the Tea Party movement came and they did something else. They had this big grassroots movement, and then they ran those people for office, and then they took over government. That's what helped shepherd in Paul LePage. It's what helped in a lot of different places, right? So here again, I think we had a anti-COVID lockdown movement on the right and on part of the left too. And so when I think about successful protests in Augusta, I attended many of them during COVID that were organic. It was people that were just really frustrated by the decisions that were being made by the governor. The legislature left town, let the governor use executive power to run both branches of government. You had to watch the news every day to see what new fiat was coming down from like the empress, essentially. Yeah. Those protests were organic and they were meaningful. And then a lot of people that were involved in that era, whether we're talking Laurel Libby or Katrina Smith, you had Reagan Paul, a lot of the people that were activated by those events then ran for office themselves and are making a difference in Maine. In this iteration right now, I think the female athlete issue is mobilizing a lot of people that are kind of not necessarily on the same side of the political spectrum. I think you have just as many Democrats as you do Republicans who are concerned about fairness in sports, about opportunities for women. And then I think that the movement that you're seeing of right now, the anti-Trump resistance movement, are just the people that have always been on the resistance side of that. So I don't know. I think it all depends what you do to convert that energy into action. And just showing up for a rally is not enough. That's not going to be what it is. But if you really activate leaders and people do something to channel the energy, I think that's what matters.
Yeah, and we'll see if they actually do. But I think it's worth I think noting, and I think that was one of the other things. As I looked at a lot of the pictures, you end up seeing a lot of older white women in particular. Yeah. There were other people, but like the majority of the people that showed up were older white people. Well, I mean, it's Maine, so we're white, right? So like that's normative. But even when I was watching some of the videos from people across the country, it seemed like it was predominantly a lot of old white liberals that were showing up to these things. Unlike, as you said, with our rallies that we've done for protecting women's sports, like it's not even, again, we're not all politically ideologically aligned. There's a lot of people that are more on the Democrat side, independent, libertarian, whatever, that were coming together on this issue, which is different. I think some people have been activated there through some of this stuff. I know one of the recent events that we did, I think there are a couple people that are going to run for school board as a result. And so anyway, just that's the type of stuff that you want to see that really helps move the needle. And the Democrats, it's interesting because it's more complicated than this, but they obviously have people don't like them right now. I think 26% approval rating is what one of the.
What does that mean? Like I know. Like, I'm happy to cite it and use it as a talking point, but what does it actually mean? What it means is people don't see leadership coming from the Democrats that reflects what they care about and what they need. But I also think that we have a bad habit in the United States of learning overlearning lessons from the last election. Because when you actually look at it, it was a close race, right? It was a close race.
Very close.
And had it played out differently, Kamala Harris would have been president. Now, Trump and his campaign knew what they needed to do to win both the Electoral College and win the popular vote. He won both. But it's still within a close margin that it could have gone the other way, which is to say it's not like it was a total rebuke and rejection of the Democrats. It was, but there's still a large share of people for whom they wanted that vision and they bought into it and they voted for that vision. So I think sometimes we overgeneralize about what Democrats did and how they got it wrong. Now, what it is exposing is weak leadership. There's weak leadership in the Democratic Party, and the issues that the Democratic Party has brought to the forefront are not the issues that are going to win them elections. And sometimes that means the issues that independents care about, or people that are willing to vote for the other party care about. Because there's some people, they used to call them the blue dog Democrats. They vote for they didn't vote for a blue dog as long as it's a Democrat. Then they became more conservative, but they were still Democrats. Well, there are some people that are never going to vote for a Republican, but there are persuadables. So the persuadable part of the electorate, what are the issues that move them and that they care about? Those aren't the things the Democrats are doing, and there aren't leaders in the Democrat Party. And why aren't there leaders in the Democrat Party? Well, part of the reason is that the way that they did, Biden locked up the field and they all participated in this fallacy that he was capable of running for president and serving as president. So they all perpetuated that and they froze out the field of new voices. And anyone that wanted to challenge him was shut out. And then they very quickly did the same thing with the coronation of Kamala Harris as the nominee. And so you didn't have the battle for the future. It didn't happen. But it doesn't mean those leaders aren't there. It just means they were shut out and they weren't visible. And now the leaders that are left, who's left there? Well, Nancy Pelosi is gone, but she's ancient. Chuck Schumer is ancient and out of touch. He used to, I think, understand how old media worked. They used to say the most dangerous place in America is between Chuck Schumer and a television camera. But I don't think he understands the current moment. You have the new generation coming up, like the Jasmine Crockett's, who are just a little bit too clickbait driven, right? They're like Marjorie Taylor Greene's, like they have something to say, they have a point of view, but like it's a little bit too much. And so I think the Democrats are looking for the next generation of leadership, but it's not far under the surface. Like they have it. I think there are governors, there are Pete Buttigieg, when he ran for president, he was gaining traction on the left. I think you've got people like him who, by the way, the Republicans, the reaction to Pete Buttigieg is pretty negative. So I don't know if he could be a uniter, but there is rising talent there that I think we shouldn't underestimate.
Yeah.
I think whenever you win one election, a party or your policy area, whatever you're on, your team wins. It's really important to know that it's not enough to just win once. You have to win every single time. And if you underestimate your opponent and you think they're not coming back, because they already have a money advantage, they have a media advantage. And if they get the right candidates who are good messengers, and it's not even like the policy.
Canada's huge, though. You mentioned Canada. I just think that the quality of the candidate is, even with the same agenda, if the Democrats had put up somebody who was a half decent candidate versus being the worst presidential candidate in U.S. history, that election could have gone very different.
Well, Trump's team at the beginning, when Kamala came in, they were so unprepared for the switch, which I was shocked by, because how could you not have a ready to go plan for that? That was so foreseeable. And it was so foreseeable if he was going to be out, she was going to be in. So the fact they didn't have a plan for it, it took them several weeks to react and respond. Turned out they were fine, but because she was such a weak candidate. But if it had been someone else, I don't know how. I mean, Trump,
Michelle Obama, for instance, not that she wanted to run, obviously, but if Michelle Obama, who is very liked by a lot of people, including a lot of middle of the road people, does that election go differently?
I don't know. Michelle Obama has a bit of a Hillary Clinton problem. She has high positives but high negatives.
Sure.
And that was the thing that helped Joe Biden win the first time against Trump. And yes, there were discrepancies in elections and whatever else, but at the end of the day, he won, he became president. And part of it was that Biden didn't have the strong negatives that Hillary Clinton had. Trump also had strong negatives of people that just really dislike Trump. And so Biden didn't have as much of a following, but he didn't have the negatives. And that's why he was able to kind of eke by. So you could have had someone like that. I think what was it? The governor of
Gretchen
Illinois,
Whitmer.
Shapiro,
Oh no. Oh,
Pennsylvania,
Shapiro.
governor of Pennsylvania, Shapiro. He was a strong contender, and there were a lot of reasons they passed by him. Sounds like he might have said no to the job as well. Tim Walz, what a joke. I mean, can you find someone who's more out of touch and out of the mainstream and doesn't get it? I think he means well. I think he's well intentioned, but like Kamala Harris obviously picked him because she didn't feel threatened by him and thought he would be a cheerleader and supporter of hers. And she wasn't worried about comparisons to him, that people were going to want him more than her. And she thought that he would be, subservient to her. And she liked that in a vice president. But I think there were some missed opportunities to look for a real leader on that party. I would have certainly done it.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I think is impacting people to kind of shift the conversation that everybody's talking about today with the markets and everything is Trump's tariffs. And I figure it's worth at least having a conversation around tariffs. And, for me, when I look at, I think number one, you talk about like how we just won. And I think we need to win again in 2026. In order to win in 2026, Trump has to do something dramatic and he has to be successful doing it because generally speaking, again, your president's party is going to lose in the midterms. And on top of that, now the Republican Party is the low propensity voters and Trump's not going to be on the ballot. So your low propensity voters who will get out to vote for Trump, how do you get them out to vote? Or how do you win in spite of the fact that they're not going to show up to vote? So it seems to me like Trump has to do something dramatic for us to be able to have a chance, at winning in 2026, in maintaining the House and Senate. And really, in order for Trump to, kind of make the agenda that he wants to bring about actually happen, we need a stronger hold in both the Senate and the House. I mean, I don't know how, but you can speak more about this, but I think we because of the filibuster, right? Like a lot of the stuff that Trump would want to pass, he's not going to be able to pass in the Senate because they're going to be able to filibuster it unless it's part of budget reconciliation. And so, in order for him to really, outside of executive orders, which, will go away once he's no longer president, in order for him to be able to advance his agenda, we really kind of have to win in 2026, in my opinion. And so I think it seems to me that tariffs might be one of the big things. Obviously, Doge talking about the budget deficit and utilizing tariffs both as a bargaining tool to like bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and and address the deficit are a big part of his tactic, but it's been called a big gamble. And I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts are about that, and whether or not you think this will be a successful gambit, or whether it will end up backfiring.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Tariffs,
and then maybe even
it's
also
really
how
hard
it
to
might
know
impact
if
Maine
that's
is the other. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Nope, that's fine. I think on tariffs, I think it's really hard to know if it'll be successful because it hasn't been tried in my lifetime. So I don't have a good reference point to say, oh, here's how it might work. I do think that there's some merit to how Trump wants to rewire the global economy. I think COVID exposed a degree to which there's a lot of stuff that we don't make here in the US that when the supply chain was disrupted, left us vulnerable and exposed, whether it's pharmaceuticals or supplies or whatever it is that we need. I think there's some strategic thinking to do about how do we get that manufacturing capacity back in the US? What does that look like? And why? And is the kind of new world order that really, if you think about when China was allowed to join the World Trade Organization and get favored nation status, that really was the beginning of this whole new global economy. But Trump and kind of the America First movement is really about undoing some of the global nature of the economy and to really create more of a nationalist lens on it. And I think there's a lot that needs to change in order for that to be successful. So it's hard to know because right now there are several different goals that Trump has articulated with his tariffs, and some of them are at conflict with each other. One of them is to negotiate so that we solve the trade imbalance between us and other countries. We have trade deficits with many of them where we buy a lot more of their stuff than they buy of our stuff. He wants to solve that by getting rid of the unfair practices that they have against us. And so we put in kind of a higher tariff on our goods and then on their goods to us, and then they have to reduce their barriers to us entering their markets. Okay, so he wants to set the table for negotiation. Over the weekend, they were saying 50 countries have called saying they want to negotiate. Japan's coming to visit. Israel's there today. There are others that they're going to speak to. But if it's meant to be just a negotiation so that we improve the markets, okay, that's one. But one of his other goals is to fund government spending through tariffs instead of through taxes, which let's just stipulate for a minute that a tariff is essentially a consumption tax. It's more complex than that. It's only on imports, but whatever. It's a flavor of consumption tax. But it's to do it through consumption tax versus our income tax, offset government spending, which is part of this broader mission of fixing the deficit. And the deficit, you attack two different ways. You attack it from a revenue perspective, like can we get more revenue? And can we reduce spending? And so it seemed like Trump had a kind of bifurcated plan. Give Elon Musk a target of $1 trillion in spending to cut, and give Howard Lutnick and Scott Bassett and the economic team, the finance team, a $1 trillion goal to raise money in tariffs, however they can. And so that works. But this idea of negotiating the tariffs away doesn't work if you need them permanently to fund your government, right? So which one is it? Or maybe it's for certain countries and not for others. That's kind of interesting to be seen. And then the tariffs that Trump announced are way higher than what the market was expecting. That's why you're seeing the reaction in the stock market. Number one, the market never took seriously that Trump would do it. And you've seen so far in Trump's administration, he'll threaten something, he'll impose it one day, and then he pulls it back the next day, creating this environment of uncertainty, but also the market not taking seriously what he said he was going to do. Now that he's done it, there's a question of, well, it was way harsher and higher and bigger than what people expected. Is that a negotiating position so that he has room to move down and keep some level of tariff in place? But it seems reasonable because now he shifted the Overton window, which Trump, by the way, is great at doing. And this movement has been very successful in making certain things that seemed like they were off the table and outside the realm of possibility possible again. That could be what's going on here. So it remains to be seen. I think the timing on it is very interesting because he waited till April 1st so he'd get outside of the first quarter. So first quarter earnings and job reports and everything else aren't going to reflect any of the noise from the tariffs. He got into April and he made the announcement that were supposed to go into effect April 9th. I think to your point about the midterm elections, if the economy is on shaky ground as we turn the corner into 2026, if we haven't seen a rebound in the stock market, if we haven't seen more investment in the US, if we've seen massive layoffs and we've seen companies that have gone under because of something to do with the tariffs, I think we start to see that sort of economic fallout. If the interest rates don't come down, if housing isn't more affordable, if we have global crises, if some of that is not going in the right direction, then we have the potential that not only is he not going to hold the House or not hold the Senate, I think the Senate map is better than the House map. If we have a blowout for the Democrats and the Democrats take majorities in both chambers, or if they take a large majority in the House, we got real problems on our hands. And so I think he's trying to do something where in the next, I think, 3 to 6 months, he wants to land the plane, give the market certainty, know where we are. And really, I think that's the timeline he has to really make something happen so that going into 2026, we know what the environment is. Because those are going to be the attacks. You can already see them coming. And Democrats have been message testing what they think works. One of the things that works really strongly when they poll it is attacking Elon Musk as a foreign-born billionaire who's playing around with your Social Security, with your benefits. They've message tested it, and that's what's good. That's why you're seeing so many attacks on Elon Musk and on Tesla. And they're also trying to neutralize him, right? They're trying to neutralize the work that he's doing and neutralize him as an ally for President Trump. And so I think how effective they are in finding more of those messages that resonate with independents, with people that are those persuadable voters, that's going to make a difference.
Well, it'd be interesting because like Elon Musk is, I mean, I think there's probably some skepticism around this, but like if they're message testing, like going after Elon and Elon leaves, Doge in May, like he's expected to do, then that doesn't really help them in 2026 as much if he's more distant. Although I don't think he's completely exiting all politics as he's intending. I think he should. Elon Musk is not ever going to listen to my advice, but it would seem to me that like it might be a better approach for him rather than being so vocal and so out there going forward to just utilize his wallet and support PACs that are trying to do things in certain areas rather than like trying to be involved himself. I was actually concerned when he was like doing that lottery that might cause people, because like there is a lot of concern. I mean, you got to think about Elon Musk. Elon Musk owns.
But he did it in Pennsylvania, and it worked in Pennsylvania, so he tried to just replicate it. But he's somewhat new to politics, so he's again replicating an effort without a lot of things. He has certain assumptions he's made on how things work. I think my big Elon Musk concern is that I don't know how much of what they've reported out of Doge is true, and that's also a Trump problem, right? Trump says a lot of things, and you can't take him literally necessarily. When he says something over time and he's consistent about it, you know what he believes. But I wouldn't say that Trump is always right on the specifics of what he's describing as what happened. Sure. And that's been true for Doge. So what's challenging about cutting government funding, there are a couple different things that are challenging. Two of the biggest ones are, number one, government spending, government budgets are a foreign language. And they're a foreign language that people from the outside and from the private sector don't understand. And knowing this just from the state government context, which is way more simple, but still very complicated than the federal government, there are a lot of things they don't understand about how it works that I think takes them time to do. And so when Elon and his band of outsiders who haven't been around federal budget speak before make certain assumptions about what things on paper mean, I don't know that they're always right. And that's why I think you've had a lot of these revisions to the projections that Doge put out. The second thing that happens is when you go to cut funding to a program that's been in existence and been used, it means the money's gone to someone somewhere. Someone's been cashing those checks. Someone's been receiving a benefit from it. And so now you create a constituency that's going to complain if it ever gets taken away. And it's really hard to keep the political will of lawmakers to cut those funds if there's someone complaining about it. And that's what we're going to see more and more and more of. And that's partially why they've been moving so quickly, is because if you do it before they've had a chance to consider it and to then rule it out, now you've taken it away. And so it goes back to putting it back and spending the money again rather than removing it. But is the political will there? And in my experience, that's much easier said than done. You've also seen all of these people on the right, on the left, that said, I'm all for eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse. People love talking about fraud, waste, and abuse, but then they can never seem to find it. They're all for eliminating it, but they can never find it. Well, we need to be more, I think, clear about how we demonstrate if something is waste or if something is abuse. There are a lot of things that we're funding that American people are horrified to find out that we are. But those things were specifically approved by Congress because there was some sympathetic constituency that wanted the funding and needed it for whatever their goal was. And so government funding, we need to rein it in. It's way out of control. So there's a spending thing that needs to be accomplished. And it just, is Doge going to be able to do it? I hope that the things they've been telling us end up being what comes to bear, and then we can get the funding cut. I think it's going to be hard to do it.
Well, I think, again, that gets back at like how important it is for us to win in 2026, because in order for us to be able to like permanently cut those things, because again, Doge doesn't have any actual authority, and the president only has, he can execute the laws that are decided by Congress, right? And so if Congress has designated this money needs to be spent for this, there's only so much that he can do to stop that spending. And so Congress is the one who really needs to act in this situation. And so it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like look at like, because Maine-based politics, right? So like what are the tariffs? Have you looked into like the impacts on the tariffs in the short term on like Maine? Because I think there is some concern from Mainers that like of what the impact is going to be on people here in Maine.
I think the natural resources economy is where you're going to see the biggest concern, right? From our fishermen. I mean, there's a lot of the lobster market that's sold internationally. There's also a lot of in the paper industry and in the forest products industry, there's a lot of value-added back and forth between the U.S. and Canada. So I know that USMCA exempts quite a bit. So I don't know the intricacies yet. I think there are the ways in which Maine is going to be just as vulnerable as other states on things like, what it means for like the auto market. If you think about the various disruptions that we suffered during COVID, those were things produced internationally that we wouldn't have here. Those are the types of products that we're likely to see some sort of. It depends how retaliation goes. I think the biggest areas of vulnerability, though, have to do with our seafood and our agricultural exports, as well as our forest products.
Okay. Yeah. No, because like there's something I can't remember exactly what it was, but there's something that we produce here that we have to then send to Canada, and they do something to it and then send it back for us to sell.
A lot of that has to do with lumber and the way in which someone likes my beard. I just trimmed it. I had it a lot bushier too, but professionally, I find I have to keep it reined in. I think there's a lot of. There's also a lot of Canadian ownership of forest products companies, of lumber companies, and they move stuff. They have mills and things on the other side, and so there are a lot of issues with respect to that. But it's usually lumber that you're talking about there.
Yeah. Well, and it would seem to me that like one of the countries that really, with all this trade war stuff, I think a lot of these countries are going to have to back down, would be my assumption, because like it would seem to me that Canada needs us a lot more than we need them. And I think that's true of a lot of these different situations, is that we bring a lot more to the table. They need to be able to sell stuff to our people more than we need. I think anyway, but it'd be interesting. So I would imagine though that Canada will be one of the first ones to, maybe I'm wrong, but they will be one of the early ones to back down, because it's going to be so harmful to their economy. But
well, I think he's approaching Canada and Mexico differently because of the USMCA that he negotiated last time to replace NAFTA. But I think there is always the risk that at some point the rest of the world goes and makes deals with each other and without us. And so we have to know kind of where we are in that risk region. I trust the Trump administration to try to figure it out. Hopefully he has good people supporting him. I always get nervous because I learned a lot about how Trump makes decisions watching The Apprentice, which maybe I shouldn't. But I think it's pretty accurate, and that he likes to hear different perspectives. He likes to have people argue against each other and debate, and he picks a side, but he can always switch again later. And so it seems like Peter Navarro right now is on the rise, on the ascendancy, and he's gotten more of his way in how Trump has approached tariffs than maybe Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. And so you have to wonder how that's going to play out and how these personalities matter. You also have to make sure that the people that are doing the job, Trump this time seems to have filled out his cabinet a little bit more with people he thinks were good on television, good messengers for the administration, but also people that he trusted more than anything. He trusted them. He trusted them to not try to undermine him, not try to undermine his agenda, to carry out his agenda, and not be out to get him. Like that was really important. The loyalty piece of it seemed to be a lot more important than it was in the past. We have to make sure that they're also surrounded by competent people who are giving them the information they need and understand how to interpret real-time data. And so I think there are some good signs in parts of the administration and some other areas where I don't have as much visibility. But I think Trump needs people who are competent in the areas in which they're working in order for himself to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think generally speaking, I would say that Trump is a smart guy in that, knowing that he needs to have people who are experts and relying on them. I think what happened to him in his previous administration is that he trusted some of the wrong people. And I think a lot of us are hopeful that he's got more trustworthy people in this go around. But time will tell on that, because like I think some people also think he's got some less trustworthy people that have snuck in, so to speak.
Well, he surrounds himself sometimes with people that disagree with each other too, because he likes to hear the debate and he likes to then have multiple perspectives. It's like when John Bolton was in the administration last time as national security advisor, Trump thought he was a hawk and didn't like him, but kind of liked hearing his other perspective until they famously had their falling out. There's some people that were very good allies of him last time that didn't find their way back in this time. There's the people that are advising from the outside. So there's a lot there. But again, the thing that the markets and the economy are going to need at some point is predictability. And Trump enjoys being unpredictable. And so those two things could come into conflict.
Yeah, no, I spent a lot of time working with people planning to invest and for retirement and stuff like that in my previous job. And predictability, like certainty, the more uncertainty, I should say, the more volatile things are. And long term, that it's not good to have unpredictability for markets, because you have to be able to make 20-year plans, and you basically hold off on making plans when you don't know what's going to happen, when there's less predictability, less
If you
certainty.
think of big decisions, right? If you're thinking about where to locate a factory, you're going to build a new factory. You have to think about the cost of the factory to build it. So let's say it's $100 million. Let's say it's $1 billion to build your factory. You have to think about all the things that are going to impact the cost of that, the materials, the steel, the cement, the wood. All of that is being impacted right here. And then you have to know how long the lifespan of that, and that there's a market for your products and how that's going to go, and that it's going to be profitable. There are a lot of decisions that go into those long time capital outlays that, if what Trump is doing right now is upending all of those assumptions that people have made about that. And so their long-term capital spending plans, you're seeing right now, there's a little bit of consumer demand is being pulled forward because people are trying to buy things before the tariffs go into effect. So you're going to see when the numbers for April are released, I'm sure the purchasing numbers are going to go up in terms of consumer purchasing. But you're also going to see there's a lot of things where people are putting a halt on importing inventory because they don't know how it's going to be treated or what's going to happen. And maybe they're waiting to see if they can avoid the tariffs later. And so that unpredictability in the short term, but it's even worse as you're thinking about, I mean, you're going to see a lot of CapEx projects get canceled that people had on their books, things they're planning to do, expansions around the world. And that's going to have some implications in financial markets.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. So thinking about Maine, it's kind of funny. You talk about these, I think this is a really easy transition into Maine politics and people considering making investments in Maine. It seems to me that though I think it is a little bit more predictable in Maine, it's predictable in the sense that it's just going to continue to get more and more expensive to live and do business in Maine. And what do you see on the economic horizon for Maine? I mean, obviously with what Janet Mills is doing, in terms of Janet Mills and the Democrats in Augusta with their spending bills that they're putting into place. I know that there was the one that was passed a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure there are others that will or have been. I haven't been as up to speed on that. That are going to increase taxes, and how that's going to impact us here in the state of Maine. And then the kind of the question that follows that up, I'll just kind of give it all to you at once, is is that going to help put us in a position where we're going to be in a good position to try and win in 2026 in Maine, or not, I guess? A lot there.
So I think that every time you have a two-term governor who's termed out, it's ripe for a change election. And so will we have the candidates that can capitalize on that? I think is the question that remains to be seen. It's really a candidate question. I think that the shortfalls we're going to have in funding and the Democrats' inability to be honest with the Maine people about how we got here and what our options are, I think that could help. I think you're seeing the Republicans in the legislature finally stand up for themselves. I don't know that we're seeing leadership there from Republicans yet. That's unfortunate. Yes, they're the minority party, but what do they want? What are they arguing for? That was the funny thing in this budget impasse showdown that happened in Augusta a few weeks ago, is you couldn't articulate what the Republicans wanted. And they need to have a clear alternative vision that they're presenting. So when they don't get it, they're saying, this is what we were fighting for. Republicans aren't good at that in Maine.
Well, so I think they were fighting for it to be less bad, but they weren't. But to your point, it wasn't clear what they
are more resonant with what the Maine people want. Yeah. And Maine people, by and large, want efficient, effective government, and they don't want to be overly spending on things. And I think they're seeing their property taxes go up. They're not necessarily seeing commensurate increase in the services they're receiving. Things are more expensive. Energy costs are high. Your electric bill is up. Everyone's telling you that you got to convert to electric cars, electric heating, electric everything. But then the cost of electricity has gone up. Part of why it's gone up is to subsidize solar farms. There's a lot that needs to be untangled here. And so if Republicans have an agenda and a winning message, I think that helps and matters. And certainly turning the page on some of the failed policies, and then setting a clear path forward, something for people to buy into and believe in.
Yeah, and so we talked a little bit about the landscape of the potential gubernatorial race when I was on with you, but I think one of the things that I more and more am coming to realize, there's so many. Donald Trump is an enigma. He's not normal, and we can't make plans based on Trump and Trumpism, because I don't think there's not another Donald Trump. But like, what I do see is that right now we're at a place where, unfortunately, despite the desire and the need to return to a grassroots kind of movement where we care about local politics, and because we care about local politics, our local politicians know more what's going on and can keep us better informed, and then we can vote for the right people at the higher levels. Instead, it's whoever's at the top of the ticket seems to be the person who either drags people across the finish line or holds people back. As much as LePage was great when he was our governor, he didn't drag people across the finish line, in 2022. And I don't know, do we have a candidate? We don't have to even, but do you think we have, of the ones that are potentially out there, that will be helpful, not only to have it put themselves in a position to win, but will help, state Senate and state House, get across the finish line? We're so close in the House.
A few things. First of all, LePage didn't even drag himself across the finish line in 2022. So I think the problem is I don't think he had the right campaign for the moment. I think there were a lot of missed opportunities there, particularly around holding Janet Mills accountable for COVID and what her decisions were there. And so if I had been running his campaign, there are different things I would have emphasized, but I don't run campaigns as my day job, so it's easy to second guess. But his strategy didn't work. Part of that is the demographic challenge that you have statewide as a Republican. When he previously won the first time, there was a three-way race. The second time, he did much better. But in a two-way race, and that's essentially what it was, when it was, in our state and who was voting and who's here now, I think he was at a disadvantage. And then I don't think he had the winning message. And I think he, again, approached it from wanting to talk about everything all the time. And I don't think his campaign ever found its footing and honed in on the right messages. If you look prior back when LePage ran for re-election in 2014, I do think he had pretty good coattails. I think the fact that Republicans held the Senate majority for the entirety of his second term, even though there was a Democrat majority in the House, I think that was part of the LePage effect. So I do think that he has done it. So I do think that it does matter and can matter. And so who's on the ballot, if they have the winning message, if you're associated with it, if you have a coordinated campaign infrastructure, I think all of that makes a big difference. I think the party at the time back then, Rick Bennett, who was very, very smart and skilled, knew what he was doing, built a better apparatus. I think that apparatus atrophied. I don't think that in 2022 the party apparatus was there in the same way. I don't think it's there now either. And so there's some thought about how you put all the pieces together and make that work. Whoever's at the top of the ticket matters, but the primary process needs to play out, and you need to see who is strong, who can raise the money, who can inspire people, who has the grassroots support. In the 2010 election, Paul LePage really had the heart. He was lightning in the bottle. People really resonated with him. Sean Moody, similarly, very well liked by the right. It's just he ran in a change election, and he said he was going to be the third term of LePage, which was a great message in the primary, but in a change election in the general, people want to know, how are you going to be different? Similar to playing Monday morning quarterback on Paul LePage. I said it at the time, so I feel better about it. But Sean Moody really should have run as an outsider and said, I'm going to, if you want more of the same, vote for Janet Mills. She's going to be a continuation of the dysfunction in Augusta. You need a solution that's from outside Augusta, and Sean Moody would have been that. But Sean, again, he had been a successful businessman. He didn't register as a Republican until the November before that primary. So it was and then he did great in the primary, had LePage's backing, had Lauren LePage, who's very talented, working for him. And so what do we need in the person that comes next? I think you need to have someone that's going to be able to raise the money they need to get their name out there and to get their message out there. And then they need a winning message. And it needs to be a message that other people can run on too. And that's really easy to trickle down. And I think that's what Trump was able to bring along is, yeah, the Trump brand. And people could say they were aligned to him, but at the state level, people want to know how you're going to impact my taxes, my education, my kids. Look at why Mark Dion won as mayor of Portland. It was really because he had the law enforcement background. He was bringing common sense back to all of these homelessness encampments, right? That's why we got Mark. You see, he had the right message at the right time. That's what we're going to need is someone who has a message from the top. And so all of these people, whoever they are that say they're going to run for governor, and I have to imagine that everyone wants to run for governor, they need to be people who have clear communication, clear message that resonates with the Maine people that other candidates can pick up and run with and be successful with.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that I've been thinking for a number of years is that we just have poor messaging as a party, generally speaking, right? And so I think what you're saying it makes a lot of sense. Is like if we have somebody good at the top who's got a good, clear message that everybody else can jump on board with, I think that makes it a lot easier. First of all, for people to be able to get out there and to run, but also, it helps. I think it helps with having a consistent message and one that can win. What would you say? I mean, you kind of mentioned a couple of things, but what would you say are the things that you think that we should focus on, we should be running on that are like winning issues with? Because you also mentioned like the demographics, because we have to take into account the demographics in the state of Maine and how they have shifted. I think in 2016, Trump lost Maine by like 2%, and then he lost it by like 4%, 4 or 5% in 2020, and then by 7%, while not really campaigning here in at least not in Southern Maine in 2024. And so in a lot of that, I believe, is a demographic shift. As we've had more people, from blue states move into Maine, and we've had a lot of our conservatives actually leave as Maine gets to feel more and more blue. And so, like, I guess the question is, how do we overcome that? And like, what are messages that like you think would be helpful for us to focus on?
The things that people are talking about at their kitchen table every day, right? They're talking about how high their electric bill is. Yep. For no added consumption. They haven't gone up, and how much electricity, but all of a sudden that's jumped up. How much their property tax has gone up. They're talking about the craziness in education right now. The money that we're spending in education and the results that we're getting are not matched up because there's another agenda at play in what's happening in our schools. And what parents and families and community members care about is the education our students are getting. And it's good in some areas and it's not in others. And I think COVID was also a big wake-up call where parents were able to see what education was being delivered in their child's classroom. And it was a wake-up call. And I think I would lean in on messages like that. Heidi Sampson's been very successful in talking about education. I would pay attention to some of the messages that she has. But any winning message has to be the things at the moment that impact people's lives. The economy matters, but you can't also just say like electric costs or energy portfolio or the megawatt cap. Like a lot of the intellectual stuff doesn't resonate. But when we talk about what are Republicans going to do to lower your electric bill, what are Republicans going to do to lower your property taxes? And property taxes are controlled the municipality, but it's all linked between how that's happening. I mean, those are what people are caring about right now in this environment where they don't know how they're going to pay their bills. How we're going to bring new business to Maine, new growth to Maine, and how we're going to sustain it. Cost of housing, obviously another major one. I think housing is the biggest issue out there. And it's a supply problem. How are you going to increase the supply of housing so that we have enough? It's supply and demand. We got to attack it from the supply side. So I think those are some of the things that people need to figure out how to talk about and talk about them in a way that, number one, shows that Republicans have a solution, and number two, are in language about how it impacts people's lives, not academic, not the cost of energy, but literally your energy bill is going up for these reasons, and here's how we're going to fix it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, you have to have. I think that makes a lot of sense. You obviously, one of the things I've been thinking is like we've been spending a lot of time talking about getting boys out of women's sports, and like I think in part, I think we need to that's something that people are really motivated about, and I think it's something I definitely am on board with. But at the same time, it's not the only issue, and we need to focus on like cost of energy and other. Other factors such as the taxes, which is general assistance is a big piece of that, and the amount of money that Portland is spending that's impacting the rest of the state in general assistance. But Um, but yeah, no, those are, I think those are the right, I would agree with you. I wonder about education sometimes, because I wonder how much, people are actually like, how, I guess how much, because when you look at polls, and again, polls are just what they are, they're polls. They don't actually tell you what you necessarily need to know. But in terms of like the issues that are most important to people and they say that are going to impact their vote, education usually isn't near the top of the list. I do think it's really important, but you actually think it's one of those things that will swing voters or have the potential to swing voters in 2026?
I think it's something that everyone wants to talk about. So, like, I sell real estate for a living, and people want to talk about real estate all day long. They want to talk about housing, about costs, about that house, about they look at Zillow every day. Education is another one that everyone has an opinion on, and everyone thinks they're an expert on. When I worked on education policy for Governor LePage, I found it frustrating because everyone thought they were an expert because everyone had been to school, and so they all had their idea of how to do it. So that's one of the reasons why everyone's ready to talk about it. I think it moves parents. I think if we're talking about issues that move independence, that move the persuadable voter, education is one of them, but not just education abroad. I think Republicans in the past, if you had to articulate what you thought the Republican position was, it was cutting funding. And that's a losing message. We're really talking about improving outcomes and what are the opportunities for our students. And I think that for a long time, we spent a lot of money on the public education system, and then we told people that they had to take student loans and go to college in order to be a success. How's that working for you? We have this ballooning student debt fiasco. All the universities got their money. The young people got saddled with debt. They're not making enough money to pay it back. So talking about how to increase their earning potential, but also what are the pathways for kids? What's their future? Children are the future. Nancy Pelosi, every time you ask her a question, she says, well, it's about the children. Always about the children. No matter what she's talking about, I bring it back to the children. It's always about the children. That's what matters to people. They care about the future. Children are the future. Education links to that. So how are we creating pathways for our kids to have high-paying jobs, to stay in Maine, and to have better outcomes? Right now, our schools are producing worse outcomes, and we're spending more money per student, more money per capita, more money as a whole than ever before. And we need to really drill down to the bottom of it. But people need to have solutions for it. You can't just say the buzzwords and hope to get elected. You have to have solutions.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you can win some people over just by talking about how bad things are, but at the same time, a lot of people want to hear like, well, what are you going to do different, right? Not just they're bad, and that will help with some people. But like I said, like a lot of people want to know, okay, but do you actually have a plan, or is it, as you said, is your plan just to cut funding, because that's not going to fix the problem? And there are a bunch of things that are being taught in schools that I think are getting in the way of education, but I also think that that's only part of the problem. Part of the reason for the poor performance, it has to do with a lot of other factors, such as like the situations that kids are in at home, their home life, parental engagement and involvement, these types of things.
Yeah, but those are, you do have to do them, but take a kid in Kenya and you show them the curriculum for the United States. I would not make the argument that there's stronger family infrastructure and better home life and more wealth in Kenya. But you get that Kenyan student, and they look at what we're teaching our kids in 7th grade and they say, I did that in 4th grade. Like, I can't believe that that's the level of math that you're teaching. I can't believe that's the level of literacy that you have. There are a lot of countries that are way worse off than the US that spend a fraction of what we spend, who are having much higher and better education outcomes than we have. And so, yes, I agree with you. The other factors matter. Parents matter. Community matters. Strengthening the household. I think all of those things absolutely matter. But at the end of the day, there are other countries that are doing way more with way less, that have bigger problems than we have, and are delivering better educational outcomes, because they take seriously that the only way that their country is going to do better is if their next generation is better than the previous generation. And in the United States, we have been for too long mortgaging our children's future to satisfy the needs of the current generation that's in power, which for a long time has been the baby boomer generation. So we're going to blame generations. Like, that one of leaders wasn't great. And you can point to any number of failed baby boomer leaders. It's one of the reasons why the baby boomers, like, there's been a big kind of gap in the baby boomers not being elected to things because people just don't like them.
Yeah, no. Well, there's a lot of things that broke down in our society, I think, as a result of the baby boomers, from where I sit. But yeah, well, cool. Well, I don't really, my brain's turning off all of a sudden, but
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think this is
I think we have. Yeah, that's where I'm like, and plus we're
well over an hour. This was a banger of an episode.
Well, I appreciate you. You're obviously a good guest, very knowledgeable, and that's what I like to do for people at home. Like I'm not the expert in everything. I try to bring in people who have knowledge and expertise that I don't have, so that I can learn along the way with the rest of us, and we can better understand what's going on in our state and our nation. And so I thank you for coming on, Aaron. People at home, be sure to share, subscribe, buy some of our merch. I can put that back up.
Nice hat, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
What else is in the merch cutter? What else is in the store?
There's tons of stuff. So there's there's t-shirts, there's mugs. Like we got a mug here. We've also got with my old logo, a mug. Ooh, if I can get it in front of the camera, that'll be good. This mug. Yeah. So sweatshirts. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Even some stickers. Like if you want to support Laurel Libby and put that out there, there's some Laurel Libby was right stickers. That's kind of fun. Well, it doesn't support Laurel Libby. Let's be clear. Like Printify makes money and I make money. Laurel does not. Off of my
people are publicly supporting her with this
exactly public support. You can show that
by financially supporting Muddy Waters.
Yep. So those are some things you guys can check out. And then obviously there are going to be short clips from this. If you guys want to go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, send those to whoever and wherever. We're on all the platforms. Aaron, if they want to hear more from you, I think they should.
Catch me on Inside Maine on WGAN. It's AM 560, 98.5 FM. You can go to WGAN.com, click podcast. You'll find our old episodes under the Inside Maine link there. And then you can catch me this Friday, April 11th, I'll be hosting the Grace Curley Show from 12 to 2. And on April 17th and 18th, I'll be hosting the Howie Carr Show from 2 to 6 p.m. On your favorite talk radio station that carries Howie Carr.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on and for all you do with the podcast, with what you're doing on the radio. Because like as I talk about with this show, we're trying to win that information war, and one of the tools that we have we already have is what you guys are doing over at WGAN, Inside Maine, and a number of other places. But like we're doing this because we need more. And what's interesting is like I was thinking about this is like when I was getting ready to introduce you, is just in general is that there's probably a lot of people who know who you are, but a lot of the people on X may not know who you are because it's kind of a different group of people, and that's one of the reasons we're trying to create this content and get it out there, is reaching other people. So thanks for coming on and helping us in this fight against the radical left.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you're welcome. All right, everybody, have a great day. We're gonna be back on Wednesday, I believe, with Senator Jim Libby. I have to confirm, but yeah, 2:00 with Jim Libby. Thanks. Have a great day.